My name is Bob Shibley. I'm the Dean here at the School of Architecture and Planning, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the inaugural lecture in our lecture series programming here at the University at Buffalo's Public Programs. This is the room and the space, and you are breaking it in tonight. So thank you and congratulations for being here for this inauguration of our facilities. Is this projecting well enough to hear me in the back? Because I've been talking all day and I'm losing it. So I'm glad we have the acoustics that work. One of the things I love to say about this room and those acoustics is that it's designed specifically for people with such a weak and limp larynx like mine. It has all the acoustic features you could hope for, including what you might imagine to be plaster on the ceiling, which is actually fabric. And it's fabric because it gives us that softening effect while never compromising the quality of the formal aspects of this room in history. So that's my tutorial for the evening. Yay, fabric stretched on things as opposed to plaster. It's also a much lighter weight, much easier installation, and one of the reasons we were able to control costs on this building in spite of the host of other things that conspired to make it much more expensive than it should have been. So with that, before I introduce Mike tonight, I want to thank you and acknowledge all those who've attended today's celebration. And I also want to shout out to an enormously effective staff and faculty at the School of Architecture and Planning. None of what you see on the walls, frankly, none of what you see in the building would have been possible without their day-to-day engagement of this process. Now, it's not like we just cast lots or voted for things. This is about, here's a detail that's not quite working, and how do we proceed from there, and what do you think? And they were actively engaged through the committee process of the faculty in making a building which truly is gold by many standards, not just LEED, and a significant addition to the historic inventory of our region and nationally. So thanks to all of them. A special shout out goes to Bradshaw Hovey, who has organized much of the symposium activities this afternoon and to our event this evening. He's curated a kind of conversation about where we've been, where we are now, and where we should go. And in that curation, we've had some very lively and I think provocative conversations, some of them difficult enough to actually be useful. And in the spirit that I offered earlier, we've had that opportunity to sort of think about what difficult enough to be useful means. And it's not like from history we know exactly where to go. And it's not like from research and science we know exactly where to go. And it's certainly not from popular vote we know where to go. God save us in the current election cycle. At some juncture, what we've structured here is a way of understanding architecture and planning in the future that has to hear all of those voices, that has to understand the complexity of the world we're in, the seriousness of the challenges we face, the opportunities in cultural production we have as planners and architects in this school. And we have never been better positioned, nationally and internationally, in relationship to our host university, in relationship to the quality and character of the community that we now live in. It's a great time to be here and in all of those places at the same time. So it is my pleasure to introduce someone who is a master at juggling all of those things. Imagine, if you will, ground zero. Think about how laden that is with the politics and the administration of decision. Think of the transportation hub that is at the center of this, that whatever you do with that hole in the ground has to keep going. And then think about the kind of architecture that emerged from that spot with the respect it had to have for the history of 9/11, for the emotion of that event in all of our lives and the subsequent consequence of that event, for the opportunity to reflect on it, and at the same time to spend the public money as wisely as you could, with constraints like, no, you can't do it that way. You have to build me a temporary train station until this one is done. That takes, frankly, someone who, a close friend of ours, Diane Georgopoulos on our Dean's Council, described to me as wickedly smart. And what's most pleasing about that characterization is he's one of ours. He's a graduate of our environmental design program who understood from that program going forward through a huge evolution. Obviously, all of us go through those as students to full professionals. That making a place like this requires an art that is way beyond any one of the disciplines any one of us ever studied. It's about all of us all the time. So we are pleased to introduce to you tonight Mike Garz. Mike is a 1972 graduate of the school, a resident of Philadelphia, a husband to Sandy Garz, also an alumni. He's also a graduate of ours, and professionally, Mike is a senior vice president of the architecture, engineering, and construction firm STV. He has overseen engineering and architectural design practice in New York, New England, and Baltimore. We invited him to speak tonight because of his pivotal role in creating the World Trade Transportation Center Hub. Mike has spent his last 12 years managing one of the most high-profile jobs imaginable. I think the original invitation was, we got a little job in Manhattan. It'll take about 12, maybe 18 months. And here we are 12 years later. The complexity of this task is truly astounding. I have a better understanding of what was involved in this project since Mike toured me through the World Trade Center last April, when he provided me with at least a part of the backstory. It's now his turn to share this story with you. I want to conclude with a deep vote of gratitude, or a voice of gratitude, for Mike and his time with us, and for this opportunity to hear this story. I think you will find it compelling and challenging, and it raises all kinds of questions about the future of a school like ours and how we think about making significant places in the future. Mike Garz, thank you.
Oh, the first thing I'm going to do is get to my real self, which is without the suit. And say that it's been an interesting day for me. It's kind of been a flashback for me. I haven't been back on this campus for almost 30 years. And seeing some old friends, some classmates, some roommates has been an interesting experience today. And I thank you for the welcome. Everybody keeps thanking me for coming and doing this. And I have to keep saying that, it's a privilege to do this. It's been a privilege to do this job. What you're going to hear tonight is a story not only of Ground Zero and what my involvement and what we've done at Ground Zero is, but it's kind of tied up with my life. This area of Manhattan, I was born in Brooklyn. My father and my grandfather had a business in Manhattan. Grew up, went to high school on Long Island. This site has actually been part of my life since I was a small child. And I'm going to try to touch on that as we go through. So I have to get my technology together, and I hope everybody can hear me, because I'm using a slightly different technology than the dean did. But we're going to talk about Ground Zero, and more particularly, I'm going to talk about the Transportation Hub, because that's the project I've been responsible for these last 12 and a half, going on 13 years. So we're going to start. The site of the World Trade Center, actually it seems to be on a timer, the site of the World Trade Center originally was Radio Row in Manhattan. This is where everybody in New York went to buy their radios, and in the 50s, their TVs. It's where my parents bought their first TV. And this is a place my father used to take me to when I was a child, because it was down by the docks where all the transatlantic ocean liners would come in. And so we used to go down and see the ships, but more importantly, he owned a bar. And Sunday mornings, after being in the office, in the bar all night, we'd go out and buy steamship fruit at the Washington Street markets, which is right at the site. And then we go into the Lower East Side and buy pickles at Gus's and bagels and onion boards and all this kind of good stuff, and go home, and the family would have a big, big breakfast. So this was the site. This was all removed to make David Rockefeller's dream of the World Trade Center come true. David Rockefeller in the cities had the notion he had just invested a lot of money in building a new Chase headquarters in Lower Manhattan. He wanted to do something world class. He wanted to build a World Trade Center, but he wanted it on the East River. To do that, he discovered he couldn't do that. And the reason he couldn't do that is nobody had the wherewithal to make that happen, except for one agency, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. Being a bi-state agency, it had the wherewithal for bonding capacity and the like to put the funds together, to accumulate the land, to be able to execute the project. So what happened was there became a negotiation. New York, New Jersey Port Authority, bi-state agency, 2 governors are the bosses. My clients are 2 governors. What happened was that New Jersey said, well, you know, it's a great idea, we really love the idea, but we need it to be closer to New Jersey. So instead of being on the East River, it was put on the Hudson River side of Manhattan. And part of the negotiation was, you're going to take over the bankrupt Hudson and Manhattan Railroad. This is the railroad that first tried to cross the Hudson River with a tunnel. They did the first tunnel, except they never completed it. The Pennsylvania Railroad did the next tunnel, then they came back and the Hudson Manhattan Railroad finished their tunnel. But they went bankrupt in the 50s, in the late 50s. So the Port Authority took over the railroad and became known as the Port Authority Trans-Hudson Railroad, PATH. That's who I work for. This was their headquarters building. Beneath that building was a railroad station. So then we come along and David Rockefeller says, okay, this is the great site, this is the part of the deal, so the site had to be made. Now what you have to understand about the original World Trade Center site is, one, that's the Hudson River. It was right adjacent. So the first thing they had to do is they built a bathtub, something to keep the river out of the site. All right. Another aspect was there was the railroad, but the railroad has 2 components to it. It comes in one tunnel and goes back to New Jersey through a second tunnel. Not only that, but while they were building the World Trade Center, they had to underpin the railroad and keep it in operation, parallel to what we've been facing in the rebuilding of Ground Zero these last 12 years. So, and then what happened was that it's a big excavation. That material went into the East River and became Battery Park City. So this is what it was as the World Trade Center was being built. And the interesting thing about this is that the World Trade Center started in 1968, the construction of the first tower. I started Buffalo in the fall of 1968. I graduated Buffalo in 72. The Trade Center was first occupied in April of 73. My college time was bracketed by the construction of these buildings. And this was something I saw every time I left my parents' house on the island and drove up here in whatever weather conditions, including the snow, to get to class. And then went home at the holidays and the like. So I was watching this. Fathers of my high school friends were working on the construction. Lots of relationship to these buildings. So the World Trade Center was built, occupied, used, and became a symbol of Manhattan, of New York, and the energy of Lower Manhattan. And then, whoop, we missed one. Something got lost here. There we go. Then something happened. 9/11. We're now 15 years and not quite 2 weeks away from 9/11. The aftermath of 9/11 was the devastation of the site, the loss of all those people, more significantly, and a real strike at the kind of heartbeat of New York, the heartbeat of the nation, and in fact the world. It has been amazing to me that over the course of this project to have been a host to people from all over the world, including royalty from many countries, our own Congress, people from every state and some 170 countries who have visited the site in the interim. So what happens? 9/11 happened, there was a recovery. After the recovery, what do? The planning starts. The Port Authority hired a firm in New York, Buyer Blinder Bell. They did some planning analyses. Nobody was happy with the result. In fact, they were castigated for what they were doing. And all they were trying to do was manage what the Port Authority was asking them to do. Replace 13 million square feet of office space, replace 400,000 square feet of retail and the like. So there were ideas floated by every architect, every consortium, idea after idea after idea. But they were just that, they were ideas. So what is Lower Manhattan? The World Trade Center, and if I get the right button, yes, that's where the World Trade Center is. What you're looking at is the New York City Transit Authority's subway map. So what you can see is the convergence of all the north-south lines and lines going to Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx in Lower Manhattan. So the idea generated by the Port Authority, by a fellow named Bob Davidson, who was the chief architect of the Port Authority at the time, was, and by the way, the Port Authority started working on the plan on 9/12. They had lost 80 plus of their own people on that day, including their executive director, but they decided that they needed to come back within 24 hours, and they started work. So the idea was to connect East River ferries to West River ferries, to the Hudson River ferries, by creating a dynamic pedestrian concourse across Lower Manhattan that connected, at the time, 13 subway lines and path, and today has been reduced to 11 subway lines because 2 are defunct. The 9 line is gone and the W line is gone. So that became the organizing principle. But after all these ideas were floated, then the Port Authority really needed a master planner to come up with a concept for what the redevelopment should be. 5,000 plus submittals were made to the Port Authority. Of that, they picked some finalists, and of the finalists, they selected Daniel Libeskind. Now, the thing about Daniel, and I've gotten to know Daniel over the years, is he is really a historicist. And he really looked at the events of the day and began to develop a plan that was based on what happened that day. One of the elements that I'm going to talk about, and you'll see, is the notion of the wedge of light. For those of you who may not know, the event from the time the first plane hit the North Tower, the second tower gets hit, the second tower falls, then the North Tower falls. That duration was 102 minutes in time. What he came up with was this notion of the wedge of light, where, I'm not very good at this. One vector was the time of day when the first plane struck, and the second was the time that first tower fell, which was the end of the event and the beginning of all the aftermath of 9/11. And that became an organizing principle for us later on. So this is the site at the time that the firm that I work for, STV, and our joint venture partner at that time was Jim Harris, now AECOM, were awarded the contract with Santiago Calatrava as our design partner, the design architect of the job. This is before my involvement. This is fall of 2003. But by that time, and I want you to note these things as we go along, the path station, well, let's see how I did this. Okay. The one line had been reconstructed, totally destroyed on 9/11. The one line was reconstructed by the New York City Transit Authority within 1 year. 2 95-year-old drawings. Basically, the only difference is the steel shapes were different because steel is different than it was 95 years ago in terms of its shapes. But they rebuilt it immediately, and the significant thing is it was built back on grade. It had been a cut and cover construction initially and was built back as a tube on grade, a subway tube on grade. And that'll be important later on in the talk. And then the path system was rebuilt on a temporary basis. It included not just the station itself and the rails coming in from the north portal and then the south portal. So this is the south portal. They come in, circulate through, and then go back under the river through the north portal. But it also included a concourse system that connected it to Church Street. So that was the condition of the site. You saw kind of the concept, or part of the concept of Liebeskin's plan, which, by the way, was represented in 7 sketches like the one I showed you. 7 sketches to get his overall concept down. And this was his visualization of what the World Trade Center site would be based on his master planning principles. This is what it is becoming. And this is a rendering that was done about 10 years ago, 9 years ago. After Daniel was, much to his chagrin, found out he's not going to be the architect of all the buildings on the site, that because there's a private developer involved, Silverstein Properties, who are going to develop 1, 2, 3, 4 office towers, and because of the timing, wants to have 4 different architects working on them. So you have SOM, you have Sir Norman Foster, Sir Richard Rogers, and Fumihiko Maki. This is how they were envisioning actualizing Daniel's plan. So a representation of the plan, just to give you some orientation, north is definitely to the top in this drawing. The 16-acre site is West Street, rebuilt after 9/11 as part of this project. VC Street on the north, Church Street on the east, and Liberty Street on the south. That is the 16 acres. 16 acres seems like a lot. It's almost like 2 small family farms in Pennsylvania at the 19th century. But you'd be amazed how small it can get. All right. So what do? You got a plan in place. You need to actualize the plan. Our part of the plan is to do the transportation hub. In doing the transportation hub, working with Santiago, where does the vision come from? It comes from a couple of different places. 2 of significance are Penn Station, which you see on your left, which is no longer with us, a great station that we have lost. I was in that station one time as a child, and I still have vivid memories of it. And Grand Central Terminal on the right, which still exists and is still in use. Grand Central is 103 or 4 years old at this point, was built for a usage pattern that was about 10% of what it experiences today. It still works. In fact, we're involved with a project at Grand Central. We're building another railroad station underneath it to bring the Long Island Railroad into the east side of Manhattan, and it will serve even more people. So Santiago comes up with this vision based on the notion of a child releasing a dove, something representing our feelings after 9/11, not those of hatred, but those of peace and love. So he takes this idea and he begins to translate it into a building form, that of the bird's wings coming up out of the ground. People call it a phoenix. It's a dove. It's not so much about death as it is about life and peace and looking to the future. And part of that story was looking at the wedge of light and understanding it. So these renderings that you're going to see right now are at least, let's see, it's 2016. They're at least 8 years old. And it's important because my job was to realize the vision. That was my job. So these were the visions 8 years ago. Concourse systems and retail, access to subway lines, movement patterns, wayfinding, intuitiveness. You know, I was downstairs looking at some boards and I picked up on a couple of things. You know, it's interesting. I was looking at the universal design boards: fit, awareness, integration, understanding, appropriateness. These all apply. These were all things that were driving the way we thought about the design. You know, and Dean, when I was looking at the boards about the Research Institute, you know, guide decision-making and policy, plan great places, public input, meaningful public input, understandable data. Wow, that was a good one. You know, these are all things that, you know, I've been looking for the hook. I've been looking for the through line, as they would say in a TED Talk, of what this is about and how I tie it back to my experience here in Buffalo. And I will tell you that in Buffalo, I learned how to think. I learned how to think about and define problems and understand the process of getting through to evaluating ideas and what's appropriate and how to then implement those programs. Process as important as the concept itself. So these are the visions. My job, I work with Santiago. I would visit him in Zurich. We'd eat dinner together and eat off the Aga Khan menu at the hotel. You know, he's a great host. He's a pain in the ass, but he's a great host. And these were the visions. These were the things we were trying to achieve. And they were unique, and they were iconic in terms of their concept. Not an easy thing to achieve. So, what is it about the transportation hub that sets it apart on the site? It is at the center. It is the only publicly accessible building on the site. You can walk in the door, not be screened. You may get profiled, but you're not going to be screened. You don't have to get a security pass. It is a public facility. It is truly a public space in the sense of what public spaces used to be like in the United States in the 19th century. But it is only one of a whole lot of projects at the World Trade Center. It integrates, it interacts, it relies on and is dependent upon by all those other projects. It is unique in that it is the only project at the World Center that does that. Every other project may touch one or two other projects. We touch every single one. And those of you who toured with me, Raleigh and Renee and Nadine and Bob Hill, know that. All right? But beyond that, those are just the projects. Then you've got the stakeholders. This is the meat of it. These are the people who are making the decisions and impacting the way you progress the work. So the decision makers, they're public, they're private, they're municipal, they're state, they're federal. They're sources of money, sources of policy, and sources of a pain in terms of getting these people together to agree on how to move forward. And you have to understand, being the one project that the Port Authority was managing in totality, we were ahead of everybody else in advancing the design. So the 18 months that I was asked to commit to, which I never knew I was going to get re-upped 8 times, was because we were so far ahead. But the Port Authority was the only one of these stakeholders that was ever willing to compromise. And by compromise, solve problems. They were willing to manage their own position in the overall game for the benefit of all the other stakeholders. And it cost them a lot of money, but they knew that in the end, they had to achieve completion of the project. So it's color-coded, it makes a nice matrix. It was a graphic we used a couple of years ago in a presentation in Los Angeles that just kind of blew everybody away, so I kind of like to use it. So that was one challenge. And you have to understand, with all those municipal agencies, federal agencies, I mean, one of the problems, it's a bi-state agency, and I told you 2 governors. Well, there have been 9 governors during this 12 and a half years. 9. There have been 5 executive directors of the Port Authority in this period of time. What's been constant is us. We've been the constant. Everybody else has changed. Even the director of construction for the Port Authority has changed. So that was one challenge. Another challenge, and I'm going to talk about challenges to the job right now. Another challenge was the one line. Rebuilt immediately after 9/11 as a commitment by then Governor Pataki. We had told them, let us shut it down again. Let us shut it down. We need the space. We need to build under it. We need to be able to deal with it. It will save the Port Authority, save all the stakeholders, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to allow us to shut the subway down for a period of time, tear it down, and rebuild it again, but in accordance with the overall plan. The governor refused. I made a commitment to the people of New York to get the subway going, maintain the connection to the Staten Island ferry, and it became a constraint on the job. So what did we have to do? Well, here's my story about what this image is. For a moment, close your eyes and just remember back to when you saw your first Western with a railroad train in it. And invariably, in that movie, that train went over a trestle across a canyon. And there's always something very precarious. Somebody's going to fall out of the train or something like that. Well, you know, understand the process. The canyon was there. The engineers looked at it and said, how are we going to get across? Well, we'll build a trestle. And they built this elaborate thing, and then the train came. We did the exact opposite. We had the train right there. That's the subway line that they rebuilt after 9/11. We had to build the trestle into the earth, and then we had to create the canyon. It's an interesting process, because if you'll notice in this slide, from about here down, it's rock. And it's New York bedrock. It is, for those of you who understand geotechnical stuff, it's 80-ton rock. You couldn't touch this stuff with that. And we weren't allowed to blast, because that subway, once we did this underpinning, if it deflected a 1/16 of an inch, it didn't matter what time of day or night it was, the transit authority would call my chief structural engineer and say, we're shutting you down, because the tracks are getting out of alignment. Another challenge on the job, as the dean mentioned, we had operated around operating railroads. Not only the one line, but the path system. We're completely rebuilding the path station after 9/11, and we had to work around railroads that operated 24/7. Which, when you get what's called a general outage, you get about 50 hours on a weekend to work without a break. Not only that, but we had another challenge. Here it is, it's 2008, and Mayor Bloomberg decides the memorial has to open by the 10th anniversary of 9/11. So that would be 9/11/11. So our designs were done, our construction had started, things were being fabricated. Now we had to change approach. Having worked with a huge team of contractors and construction managers and designers, all of a sudden, instead of working from the ground up and building this thing in vertical slices, we had to build the roof first, which meant that we were now building a railroad underneath that roof, okay? And, you know, that meant pieces of equipment like this inside a building with an operating railroad next door, and trying to figure out how to get materials in there and move them around and the like. The contractors were phenomenal in what they had to do. But this all cost money. This was all costing money beyond our very generous budget of $2.2 billion, which I don't want to know the bottom line number. Another challenge. How do you create a pedestrian environment below grade that offers some of the awareness and understanding issues of wayfinding in a major transportation facility that's going to deal with 250,000 people a day and not follow the typical New York City subway model, which is a column every 5 feet. So we built 3 bridges in the ground. And you have to understand, this bridge is actually, this is a bridge spanning, as you see, some 210 plus feet. It's actually a 2-level bridge, because the lower level, this level, that's the subway, and that's actually a station of the subway on the site. And then above, that's the street up there. And in New York, a street has to support a load of fire trucks, cranes, and the like. So it's not a simple structure. Plus the fact that we had some extraordinary criteria to meet that had to deal with security and blast resistance and the like. But we built this 200 plus linear foot spanning bridge in the ground while the subway was operating and made it all work. So another challenge. The way we responded to a lot of the criteria was not to have exposed structure. And what I mean by that is we removed potentials for failure and targets of opportunity by eliminating them from the design. So we took our columns and we hid them. When we didn't hide them, we made them incredibly robust. What you see here is a column lying on its side, one of the 4 that support that bridge I just showed you. that was so large and massive that it couldn't be built off-site. It came to the site in 6 or 8 major pieces. The plates that make up that column, as you can really see if you look closely, and you look at those welding seams, each one of those dimensions is a plate of steel. It's like 6 to 8 inches thick, depending on where it is. And these things were assembled on the site. These columns sat in tents on the site for 6 months being welded. We had other problems, other challenges. We support projects. We're supported by projects. We integrate with projects. We take space from projects. They take space from us. We're well into design. We're well into construction. And the Memorial Pavilion, the entry into the Memorial Museum, is designed by Snøhetta after 3 failed design attempts. And it only failed because the program kept shrinking on them. The dollars kept shrinking on them, and they had to redesign accordingly. But Craig Dykers has become a good friend of Snøhetta, a partner in Snøhetta, and Craig just insisted that his column grid was not going to change. Well, his column grid, they sit right on top of the station, did not match ours. So we had to design, after the fact, a lot of transfer structures in order to support his building. I got him to agree to at least consolidate plumbing lines, but it would have been nice to get the columns over top of each other, because our columns were controlled by the railroad. You just can't put a column anywhere in a railroad system. Then another challenge was dealing with historical issues on the site. I was glad to hear the best of the new and the best of the old. We had a not so new, but yet because of the event of 9/11, became so historically significant that the SHPO downstate required us to incorporate certain elements of the former World Trade Center into the project, including elements of the bathtub slurry walls. Then we had another challenge. And we talk in environmental design, we used to talk about the integration of the man-made with the natural environments. It was a big part of what we were trying to reasonably do back then, is figure out that solution. I remember the first Earth Day happened while I was here in Buffalo. Boy, so I'm dating myself. Well, Superstorm Sandy hit us. And Superstorm Sandy, this is actually the adjacent site. This is the Vehicle Security Center. There's the governor. This is my active day-to-day client, Steve Plate. That's the railroad station, and that's water basically lapping at the platform edges. Our mechanical room, which is 30 feet tall, was completely flooded. Right after we installed major substations and major mechanical equipment, it was a total loss on the job and had to be redone. So, finally, next big problem is logistics. 16 acres, sounds like a giant site. No access. Remember all those projects I showed you? I gave you that list of projects. Well, you begin to see what's going on here. This is about 2 years into the construction project. We've now built the east bathtub and connected it to the west bathtub. The south bathtub hasn't started yet. We've started construction of the new PATH station. We've had to advance construction of one of our concourses to accommodate the construction of Tower 1 because they needed layout space. They needed to access 4 sides of the tower to be able to lift their steel, which meant we couldn't do anything. But that was a negotiation between Silverstein Properties and the Port Authority. That could do nothing about at the time. We also ended up, we were, as the Port Authority, I should say, was obligated to provide the excavations for Silverstein's 3 other towers. So that became a major issue for us because we had to focus on digging his ditch before we could build our building. And part of that was we had to actually remove a temporary station, build a new temporary station, and then demolish the old foundations of the H&M building that I showed you in that one of those very early slides. So logistics was a major issue on this site. We literally only had one lifeline, And that was the roadway atop the one line. The one line, which is sitting on that underpinning, was the lifeline. That is where 90% of the materials came into the job in the first 4 years of the project. Not only for us, but for the memorial and for the towers. That's where everything came in and everything went out. And it's sitting on these little piles, and it's kind of like rickety looking, and we're excavating. And even though we can't blast 50 feet away, Silverstein Properties is able to blast foundations out in our excavation for their towers. It's kind of an interesting story. But one of the things that I love about this, and one of the people I work with at the port, a fellow named Tom Grossi, who's an architect, and he has this wonderful collection of sketches that he's done over the course of the job, and he just retired, was the ballet of cranes. There were so many tower cranes, and what was going on in the site, you just watched them dance, and you'd wonder, why aren't they just crashing into one another all the time? But it was just a fabulous, fabulous thing to watch. And we had some big cranes, and again, there's that one line. I think, yep, there it is. There's the one line. You know, the underpinning is now advanced to the permanent underpinning. We've now been building structure, permanent structure going down, another impact of opening up the memorial in 2011. We're preparing for the bridge right now, and we basically have gone excavated down 100 feet below grade for our mechanical room, which is the size of a football field. And for those of you that have never figured that out, that's about 60,000 square feet. We move about 3 million cubic feet of air a minute. And then there was the last challenge, which is really about geometry. Santiago has very keen ideas about geometry, and God bless him for it. He understands it, I don't. My math left me a long time ago, but I had to relearn a lot. And you have to understand, we're dealing with sloping site conditions. So nothing you see, even though it looks symmetrical, nothing is symmetrical. Everything is unique. So there are thousands of parts, and there's 40,000 tons of this stuff. It's also very big, and is coming from very far away, and needs to fit together very precisely. I mean, you get a sense of the scale and the complexity of the pieces. Structure supporting structure supporting structure. This is an escalator pit. I'll show you this later on where it actually is. But we actually designed all this stuff. It was kind of frightening to do, but we did it. And I'll tell you, the greatest burden of my career so far was signing all the drawings, because there were thousands of them. You know, and you know, it's kind of interesting. You look at, you know, this guy down here. This is one of our rafters, and this isn't even a big one, but that's one of our rafters. And that came on a ship from Italy, by the way. It's the first time in my career I actually got a shop drawing of the hull and of the holds of a ship, and how they were going to lay the different pieces of the steel into the ship. It was submitted as a shop drawing. I didn't know what to do with it. I just sent it back unreviewed. You know, it's kind of goofy. And then we have, you know, the sculptural aspects of things like marble. You know, a lot of us are used to using veneers. We have a lot of very solid pieces of marble, some weighing upwards of 5,000 pounds. The marble setters love us and they hate us. I will tell you that when we came down to matters of fit, they would come out and they had people who would actually work the stone with sandpaper to make it work out. And I'll never forget, the superintendent was very proud one day. He came up, and Calatrava's people had this phenomenal interest in making every line match every other line, whether it was a floor tile pattern, marble floor tiles of 5 foot in length, meeting a wall, meeting a metal panel, meeting an escalator guardrail, et cetera, and so on. And so the superintendent came up to me and says, I got to show you this. He had worked it out. He'd laid it out so perfectly that a joint in the floor actually came and met exactly with that joint. And he was so proud that he was able to lay it out and get it done. By the way, his father died on 9/11 at the site. So He was so totally committed to this job. Geometry was a major problem. So people are really what drove this job. These are two of the more significant people on the job. On your right is Santiago Calatrava. On your left is Stephen Plate. Stephen Plate is the director of World Trade Center construction for the Port Authority. Steve's responsibility is the entire site. Basically a $20 billion project watched by the world, ordained by two governors who keep changing, executive directors, and watched by everybody. Steve is the one who has seen everything. Steve lived through 9/11 as one of the Port Authority employees on the site. Steve is kind of an interesting guy. He's been in charge of the job for probably the last 9 or 10 years. He has the 30,000-foot view and the 3-inch view all at the same time. He does more to drive the job than any other single individual. So then there are the engineers, some of the engineers. You should understand we are part of a joint venture, the Downtown Partnership. We've had 1,500 employee numbers issued under our joint venture over the 12 years, 40 consultants part of that crew. We've had people representing some 65 countries that have been on staff, and I can't tell you how many languages I haven't understood in the office. But this is our soft opening in May, when it was a celebration of those who were involved in creating this project. Contractors, laborers, designers, managers, and the like. These are some of the Port Authority people and our chief structural engineer, Kishore Doshi. This is what it was like on that day. These are all people who are part of creating this. And this is what we created. And it's still pretty raw at this point. But we all did it for these people, the public. And I will tell you, I took great personal offense about a year ago when all the architectural critics started criticizing the job before it was done and really focused on money and time and the like, and never mentioned 9/11 and never mentioned why we were there. Because one thing I want you all to be very understanding of is all of us who have been involved with this job for so many years, all of us who have made a living off of this project for so many years, would rather not have done this. None of us wanted to have to do this. And that's the level of commitment that everybody made, in that most people have stayed with this job through its entire course. That same opening day, it was amazing how the public reacted to the space. This woman, she's been described as a 49-year-old dancer. She just, after the ceremony, she just started dancing in the space. And you see everything. So this is what the overall site looks like today. And I believe that what I'm going to talk about now is the other projects, to give you a sense. This is Brookfield Place. They built a new pavilion designed by Cesar Pelli Associates. Where you see the escalators, the elevators, that's actually our design. That component of it was designed by us and bought by the Port Authority, but installed by Brookfield because they wanted to have their own authorship. They built half the tunnel under West Street. We built the other half. It was all our design. Their half leaks. Their contractors sucked. What can I tell you? We connect to the Fulton Street Transit Center. This is the connection to 9 of the 11 subway lines is through this facility. Tower 1, which you all know about. Tower 2, interesting story about Tower 2. On your left is the original design by Norman Foster Partners. And that has now been abandoned for the design on the right by Bjarke Ingels. The reason for the change in architect was a change in program from a building focused on financial organizations and trading floors to, quote, the Murdoch organization and wanting to have TV studios. That was what compelled the change in design. Murdoch walked away from the developer. It's not leased, but they're going to proceed with this design. Tower 3 by Richard Rogers on On your left is the design drawing. On the right is where it is in construction. As of about 3 weeks ago, it's been topped out in the concrete. The steel's still going on. Tower 4, this is Fumihiko Maki's building, and I really like this building. It's a very elegant building. The memorial, and I have to apologize, the quality of this photograph is not the best, but I'm really captivated by this little Melior sprinkler, which when I saw it, I said, oh my God, it's just like the wings of the building, and I just had to take the photograph. So, a good deal of these are mine. This is most, one of the most prominent visitors has been the Pope last year. The pavilion by Snøhetta and the North Pool. This is another project that our company is involved with, which is the Vehicle Security Center, and which is this project under construction, which it's actually done. But on top of it is Calatrava's other job at the site, which is the replacement church for the St. Nicholas parish of the Greek Orthodox Church in New York. St. Nicholas used to be here, was destroyed on 9/11. The Port Authority agreed to rebuild it in that original location, and the Archbishop said, no, I want a better site. So he got the corner. Shrewd guy. However, when he got that corner, this is our ramp. Now you have to understand, this is a security center for trucks and buses and cars. We have over-the-road tractor trailers that come into this building, go through a screening process, go through an elaborate checkout process. They get X-rayed, they get this raid, they get that raid, they go through TSA security, basically. They go down 60 feet to the roadway system, and they serve all the buildings on the site. And it's blast-proof. And then they say, well, we want you to put the church right on top of it. We want to put the church right there. Okay, figure out how to make that happen. It's sitting on top of a silo that's been built to resist a really big blast. But we figured it out. That's the design. It's actually the structure is pretty much done on that right now. Liberty Park, which you see on your right, opened this summer. It's actually been well received by the public. And you talk about community involvement. This is what they wanted. They wanted recreational opportunity. Here's another project on the site. Now this is a very early design by Gary for what Daniel Libeskind had planned as the Cultural Arts, Performing Arts Center on the site. Very controversial project. It's in the wastebasket, and now it's this. This was just released a couple of weeks ago. This is a design by a firm, goes by the acronym REX. I really don't know much about them, but this was just released. It's a cube sitting on the site. So for those of you who are Stanley Kubrick fans, this may be your thing. And now let's just go through the hub. And I'm not going to talk a whole lot about the hub. I'm going to let the images speak for themselves. But when you think of the hub, most people, when they think of the hub, they think of what is now known as the Oculus, that space above ground, which only is a small portion of the project. It is the iconic portion of the project, but is only a small representation of the project. Because when you strip the street level off, we go way down. We have the path station, and the path station, we're kind of setting a new standard for subway and public transit in the United States. This was the first platform delivered a couple of years ago. These were just opened 2 weeks ago. They are state-of-the-art. They meet all the requirements of the latest code standards and et cetera and so on, and have advanced features in them. Then there's the mezzanine level of the path station, the place where you pay your fare, you find out where you're going to go, and you get to the right platform. By the way, this from here, this rib to this rib, That's the subway line going over your head. The PATH station is over here. Talk about complications. 2 codes. Everything beyond that glass wall, that glass rail line right there, this line, that's NFPA 130, 1 code. Everything outside of that is New York City building code. All right? It is a virtual separation. I actually got to use that word in practice. It's virtual. We have smoke control, we have water, fire protection systems and the like, alarm systems. Everything is designed that once you step through that barrier, you're in a totally different environment. It's controlled totally different from the environment you just came from. But that one line's going overhead and there are 2 levels below you. So this is Path Hall, and if you'll remember some of those early renderings, the Verondale Truss, this is this center spine. Interesting story there. When the mayor said open the memorial on 9/11/11, well, geez, we can't get that done until 9/13. That was the fabrication schedule. So originally that was going to go in first, and all the ribs follow, et cetera, and so on. Well, all of this work was there, sitting on temporary supports, waiting for this to be made. That is 5,000 plus pieces of steel, some this big and some really big. We had to build everything and then insert the spine. It's kind of like all your ribs were in place and then somebody put the vertebrae in after the fact. It was an interesting problem. This is what you can see. Now, here's an anecdote. Meetings with all the stakeholders. I can remember a meeting with Davis Brody Bond, who did the memorial, and it was a Rod's design, but Davis Brody Bond was the executive architect. I can remember being in meetings with them and arguing about 5/8 of an inch. We want you to move this wall 5/8 of an inch. Well, wait a minute. That wall is 3 feet thick. It's made out of concrete, and the tolerance on that is 2 to 4 inches. So you really want that 5/8 of an inch? I'll give you the 5/8 of an inch, but in the end, you're really not going to have it anyway, because the tolerance of building that wall is such it's going to be, 3 inches into your space anyway. Because that right there, remember I told you to pay attention to that early slide, that is the North Pool. We actually go under the North Pool. We're actually built under the South Pool. The original master plan showed them occupying the space under the South Pool with their electrical substation. They decided that was not a smart move. So what did they do? They swapped with the Port Authority, and one of the Port Authority's 6 substations is under the South Pool. And you know what? The pool leaks. So our concourse system, I talked about geometry. You can just imagine all these parts are different. Every part had to be designed, detailed, and engineered. And that's Path Hall. But this project is really about moving people. And it's moving people in a way that they're aware of where they are, where they want to go. And that was one of the keys to the entire design and the openness of the project. This is actually the transit hub. This is not a downloaded image. I took this on the job site a couple days ago. The old Trade Center, that's what it looked like at the grade, up at the plaza level, the super block of the Trade Center. This is what it looked like below. That was PATH, right there. Those are the escalators that came up from the PATH system. One of the 3 top income-producing shopping areas in the United States prior to 9/11. And it looked like that, a system that you couldn't imagine what it was like to move through. This is our concourse system. What you see in yellow is the lower transit hall, the main Oculus floor, and some of the upper concourses to the west, connecting over to Brookfield and through the towers. By the way, we're not only the only public building on the site, we actually connect to the 4 office towers. We will connect to the Performing Arts Center. We connect to the Observation Tower, atop Tower 1. We provide services to everybody. the upper concourse. Oop. And, you know, it's this. It's real simple. Anybody can explain this to anybody else. It looks like this. I'll never forget one of the first meetings I had with Santiago. I told him how much I had admired early on in his career his rail station in Zurich. And he explained the design of his rail station in Zurich like this. He took a piece of paper, he put his hand down, he traced that shape, and then he took that shape and repeated it about a dozen times, and he had the section of that Stadelhofen station in Zurich. It was amazing. He's kind of incredible. It's big, it's heavy, it hangs there, it does some remarkable things. It's been compared to Grand Central Terminal, and people keep wondering why it's like Grand Central Terminal. Grand Central Terminal, when it was designed for a use population of about 75,000 people. Today, it serves over 400,000 people a day. We're designed for 250,000 people 5 years from now, and 50 years from now, it will probably be on the order of 400,000 people. So you start to think about it, and we did this interesting drawing. We overlaid our project on Grand Central Terminal. We're basically the same. Volumetrically, we're almost identical. We're about the same length, about the same width, about the same overall height. We're just a different geometry. We look a lot bigger. But we had to prove that there was a point to it. So we did simulations. And this is early on. You got to understand, this is 2004 we did this. Working with a software program that's based on CFD analysis, we modeled pedestrian movement. And you can see how pedestrian movement is going through the space. You see all the concourse system there. Well, I was in the building Tuesday night, and I did this. Now, the model was the AM rush hour, which is the peak. This is the PM. The model was pretty damn accurate. And we called this a mixing bowl. Its role was to allow people to figure out where they were going and get there without knocking each other over. Because this is what it's like. I mean, of course, I'm zoomed in, so it compresses all the imagery, but that is what it's like in a train station. This is like what it's like before people are in it. And, geometry, structure, and the like. Light. The light. What'd you think of the light? I mean, the light, it's a material. Light is a material. You've got to remember that. It's a material. So here it is. This is mid-August, and Westfield is deciding they are going to declare their opening. Here's an interesting aside, and I'm running a little slow, so I'm going to do this quickly. We had an alternative opening part. None of us involved with the design, construction of the project or management of the construction were invited to the opening. I got an email, you're invited to the first and last celebration of the real retail opening of the hub at a bar. This bar has an outdoor area so we could all smoke cigars and drink ourselves silly. And when I got there, it was an F the dingoes, because Westfield is an Australian company and they had been effing the gringos through the project, because Westfield is the retail development partner of the Port Authority in the project. And they don't believe that anybody exists except themselves. And they are doing whatever they can to, as Santiago would call it, turn the project into a bordello. This is what it looked like with people in it, which was really nice to see. This is why we did the work, is to celebrate people in the life of New York City. Just a variety of views. Oh, I didn't emphasize this before. Like I said, we're 95% of the project is below grade. So all this major public space is below grade. This is the street level. And from this end of the building to that end of the building, it slopes 11 feet. So that's why every piece is different. And if you really look carefully, you can see that slope. But it's nice to see people. Some of these images are at night, the evening after the opening, when I had my first nighttime walk through the building. And when the critics started and I was feeling bad, my daughter said, "Don't worry, Dad, I've already heard on or read on Google that it's going to be the selfie location of 2016. And my God, she was right. People are just hanging out and just taking pictures. So just various images of the building in the evening. It's a 24/7 facility, 365 days a year. It never shuts down, ever. Remember that piece that I said was an escalator pit? That's it right there. And right there. There were 4 of them in the building. But that's where it sits. That's all cantilevered out. So you come in, it's kind of spectacular. It was an engineering challenge to figure out how to not make it bounce. Escalators are a little sensitive to that. Our connection to Fulton Street is through a concourse that they built beyond our project under another city street. This is some of the drama of what we've done. This is as you descend into the building. And of course, this is 10 o'clock at night, so don't expect the retail to be very active. I have to tell you, out of 100 plus retail establishments in the building, this one, 2-story Apple store, is the only retail tenant that understood they were part of something greater than themselves, and the design of their space is an extension of what Calatrava did. They follow the order, the organization, the understanding of the structure. Nobody else did it. Everybody else is their store, their design. They actually, within their own palette, became part of the whole, which is an incredible, incredible feat. Our connections to transit, signage is not installed yet, but this is to the Fulton Street Transit Center. Future connection, direct connection to the platform of the R train, the 1 train, the ceiling, the roof, the skylight, of course, and the skylight does open. It works. It keeps the rain out. It does work. Exterior views. Everybody's been critical of the wings, and not because they don't understand them. The critics are criticizing it before they could even be on the site. There was construction fencing around the site for years and years and years, and yet they were being critical of the design of the building because they couldn't appreciate the design. The wings are sheltering. You're standing between 2 towers. Our building is between 2 towers the size of the Empire State Building. That's how big those towers are. And yet these wings protect that public space. They shelter that public space. Not only that, but they begin to frame views to Brookfield Place, Tower 1, and then it has this kind of imagery at night. Tower 1 in the background there. It's a backdrop to the memorial. This is the North Pool in the foreground, and you're seeing the building in the background. And the shadow play on the structure is incredible during the course of the day. In the evening, same view from the memorial. And then the World Trade Center as it was about 3 weeks ago. Tower 2 is not under construction yet. Tower 3 is. The Performing Arts Center, we've just demolished the temporary station. It's in the process of being demolished now. And that's my story. And I always finish with this slide because this is the power of imagery. There are 5 lines on that board. Who doesn't know what they represent? Those towers have such an imprint on our memory, and I wish John was here because there's the whole neural thing that he's into. This is one of the real powers of the World Trade Center, is those 2 towers meant so much. And just a final personal note. On 9/9, I was in New York. I live in Philadelphia. On 9/9, I was in New York. And we had just come back. We were coming back from Staten Island with friends of ours from Israel, someone who I had gone to architecture school with at Penn, along with their child who was a They had adopted from Uzbekistan. Zoe, who was about that big at the time, was essentially a goddaughter of mine. And we were coming back on the Staten Island ferry in the evening that Sunday night, looking at the towers, which she, when they lived in Brooklyn, had always used as her landmark. She always knew where she was based on those towers. And we were coming back on 9/9 and looking at the towers, and they were gold. They were actually gold in the sunset. And we had that memory, and 2 days later they were gone. That is my story. Thank you all for being so attentive. Absolutely, absolutely.
Mike's going to give you question opportunities. To be able to capture it, we're going to have to put it on a mic. So I think, Corey, if I could ask you to get this one. Bradshaw, you have that one. And wait for the mic to come to you so we can capture the full flavor of the conversation. Mike, thank you. Questions?
Anybody? Oh, come on. This is a School of Architecture and Planning at Buffalo.
Every critique is a gift.
For students. I'm not a student.
A great job. That was
Thank you.
really great. Just, I was reading some of the critics, and some of them felt that having retail stores in the space was like sacrilege. What's your feeling about that?
All right. There is that. We were very conscious of that, and I remember Santiago and I, after drinking about 3 bottles of wine one night in Zurich, having a conversation about it. And we were with another architect who was my partner at the time in the job, Rafi. And we were discussing it at length, and we made a fundamental decision. The PATH station, the Memorial Museum, is 2 surfaces within our project. We came to the decision that we would do nothing to commercialize those 2 walls. That was when I was showing you the Path Hall, the wall where the fountain comes through. That was one of those walls. So we just wanted to do this very simple marble finish. And then the wall that runs down the West Street concourse literally is the north wall of the Memorial Museum and the Memorial Pool. And we decided not to commercialize that at all. We made it a big point with the Port Authority. We were not going to commercialize that. Opposite side, you can have 2 levels of stores, you can do whatever you want, but this side, we are going to be very respectful because the remains were going to be on the other side of that wall. We carried that out. What's happening now is the retail developer on the west concourse wall has installed this 208-foot video wall that's carrying advertising. We objected strongly. Calatrava objected strongly. I mean, one thing about Santiago, he's got stones. When he's upset about something, he writes to the governor. He doesn't write to us. He doesn't write to the client. He writes to the governor. And he complained about it. But then what happened was they went to the Memorial Museum, actually the National 9/11 Foundation, and September 11th Foundation, I should say. And they said it was okay, that they didn't have a problem with it. We do. We still do. Westfield has tried to turn it into one of their feature malls, and they talk about it as being a world stage. They have some strange ideas. They want to take, I'm in Buffalo, so I'm going to be careful here. Please don't take what I say next as being a bias. I love hockey. They want to put an ice skating rink in the Oculus in the wintertime. And we said, what are you, crazy? First of all, the floor is a radiant floor, and you're never going to make ice on it. So it's that kind of thing. I left this morning to go outside and take a phone call where the deputy operations manager is calling me up and says, well, what is it that your memo said about, we have to get special permits to run special events in here? I said, yeah, you have to get, it's New York City. You've got to get a permit for everything you do. Well, why? And I went into it. Santiago is livid. I have to tell you that I was very offended on their opening. I had to go through and certify the day before they opened on certain aspects of the egress system. And I'm walking down one of our concourses, and there's an exit sign hanging and an exit sign hanging. And we're supposed to have 2 sets of glass doors that walk into vestibules and then go into the exit. One set of doors is missing. What's in its place is 2 vending machines. What? I had a cow. I mean, I used to curse a lot early in my career. I used to get very upset. This job has really mellowed me out some. And my client was astounded at the kind of outrage that it was exhibiting. And then I looked up and I saw what my client had done. I got even crazier. But, it is what it is. They have the right to do things. It's unfortunate, but, it's like anything else. It's going to adapt to what goes on. I will tell you this. My prediction is that at least 60% of the stores that are in there now won't be there in a year. I think they've misunderstood their market. But we're there for the moving public, the transit public. And, I didn't give you the numbers, but the memorial, since it opened in 9/11/11, so it's five years, 23 million visitors. The museum, which is open 2 years and is pay to play, over 4 million visitors. The only attraction at the site, the observation tower, is the only one that's not meeting its market targets. And that's okay, because they're charging like $35 to go up and take an elevator ride.
Do you think people are afraid to go up there?
No, I don't think that's the case. I think people are scared away by the price. A family of 4, you're spending $200 to go take a view. And quite frankly, it does not compare to the quality of the windows on the world view. Another question? No questions. I'm disappointed. I meet with architects all the time. I've done this a lot of times. In fact, 2 weeks ago, I was in St. Louis doing it for the 4th time in St. Louis. They've had me there every 2 years for 8 years. I can't get out of there without an hour of questions being asked. So I see a man with a microphone first.
I really enjoyed your presentation. Beautiful building. It's like a cathedral. Only thing that comes to mind on the outside on a pedestrian level, is there any snow and ice concern with
Yes?
Is there any way to mitigate that without affecting the aesthetics?
Well, let's put it. I will tell you that I did a lot of research, along with a couple of people in the office, and we had come up years ago with actually a technological solution to it that was passive. There are what are known as isophobic paints, coatings, that you can put on the building. But the Port Authority was unwilling to go that route because it was another coat on top of, they've probably painted that building 8 times already. Because every time they paint it, somebody goes do more work and they have to repaint it. And it's painted with bridge paint, which is not cheap. And so they were against putting the isophobic paint on it. But so far we've been through 2 winters and we have not had an ice problem yet. We have not had a water problem yet. Keep my fingers crossed. However, the plaza has been shut down even to workers because the towers are shredding ice. Tower 1 has a bad ice problem.
Could they possibly have like a net on the underside that is virtually invisible to
The original design for the building, there was glass in the wings. It was supposed to be a glass umbrella. But for technical reasons, we just didn't go there. And in fact, at one time, the wings actually did this. They actually moved, and that's what opened the skylight. Now it's just the skylight that opens. I used to describe it, we had actually worked it out. It was amazing, the collaboration between Santiago, who's a remarkable engineer, and our own engineering staff. We'd actually, think of your grandmother's change purse, with the snap. at the top. It was hinged at either side, and we had hydraulics in the hinges, and we just had to move the hydraulic pistons 9 inches at the ends, and because of the geometry, it would open up the roof to 10 meters at the peak. But we decided not to go there. There was too much risk involved, and it was seen as a cost savings. It really wasn't. Oh, shh, don't tell anybody I said that, please. Oh my gosh, it's on tape. You're going to have to cut that out of the tape. All right, there was another question over here. You need the mic.
Over these years, what did you learn personally about managing your time and managing stress, managing the inbox?
Managing the inbox? That's easy. Don't pay attention to it, you see. It's like, wait, I've managed my inbox today. Let's see what's going on.
I don't mean that. I don't mean
I mean, there are probably 100 emails from today in here. Being part of a great team of people. We cover each other. It's been an incredible operation. I have to tell you, I've been in joint ventures before. It's how I got hired by this company. I was a project manager from another firm in a joint venture that they were part of, and they liked me so much they hired me 8 years after I left the other firm. One of the things that was key for us when we came together as the Downtown Design Partnership, that was our identity. I was not with STV. He was not with Dim Jim Harris. He was not with Parsons Transportation Group. We were Downtown Design Partnership. We became a firm, a very robust firm, a fully integrated firm, a very highly collaborative firm. And when we started this job, BIM was in its infancy. Our job is a combination of hand drawings and CAD drawings. All that geometry was worked out two-dimensionally. Not much three-dimensional modeling was done. So it was really about collaboration. And it was the spirit. And you have to understand, we were all there, and we were all feeling privileged to have been there. Personally, 9/11, I was in Philadelphia. I mean, I told you my relationship to this site. 9/11 passed, my father had passed away years before. I actually wrote a letter to my father to express my feelings. And then I took that and I presented that to the chairman of my company. And I said, I'd like to write a memo to the staff. He says, okay, with some edit, you can release that. And what I said was that it was the following. 9/11 happened. Here I was, God, what was it, 51 years old. I couldn't join the service. Because what did you want to do? You wanted to react. I couldn't get into New York City. I couldn't help with the recovery. Couldn't help with the rescue of the recovery. Couldn't do anything. The only thing I could do was donate money. And that was so unsatisfactory in reaction to that event that I wrote this memo to my staff and I said, look, we're all feeling the same way, but what we can do is we can do the very best we can at the things we do because we work for the government, we work for educational institutions, we don't do developer work, we work for some corporations. But I said, what we can do is improve continuously the quality of what we're doing for those clients to help them with the mission of overcoming what happened on 9/11. And then I was given the privilege of doing this. And it was just that. It was a privilege. And all of us felt that way. That of everybody that they could pick to do this work, they chose us. I felt privileged because the chairman of the company reached out to me. We're having problems dealing with Mr. Calatrava. You're the right guy to deal with him. And I came in. My first job was to mediate between Calatrava and the Port Authority. That's what I was brought in to do. So it was about privilege. It was about the privilege of being there and being part of it. Like I said, none of us wanted to be there. But being there, we felt we all had to be not only in our A game, we needed to be in our double A game. Not an A+, but a double A game. And everybody who's been involved with the project has been like that. The microphone's going behind you.
Thank you for a very inspiring presentation and an inspiring building. But could you tell us a little bit about, you talk about the difficulty of dealing with Calatrava, and could you tell us a little bit about how he was selected and why he got the commission to do this?
You know, I honestly can't. I can't tell you why, because I wasn't involved. I can tell you this, that the reason our joint venture reached out to Calatrava was when you looked around the world, the Port Authority wanted to do something world-class. And the reason they went to Calatrava is he was one of the few architects in the world doing world-class rail-oriented, transit-oriented architecture. And that was his reputation. It was not on the basis of his character or his personality, it was the work that he had done. And that's why the team selected him. Well, it could have gone to a Grimshaw or somebody like that, but they chose Calatrava. And what was done in the competition, because it was down to 3 firms, in the competition, designs were put forward, and everybody latched on to his vision. Because he captured the spirit. I really feel he's the one that captured the spirit the Port Authority had towards doing this work. And I will tell you that the person, you know, there are so many anecdotes, but I had met, while I was working with one of the project managers from the port, who was retired probably, I guess about 8, 9 years ago. He taught me more about the vision than I understood. Because we were talking about the job one day, and he said, we have to realize this design. Because every time I look at the renderings, I see on 9/11 when the skylight opens, I see the angels coming down from heaven to collect the souls of those who died here that day. And it's like I almost fell on the floor. Because he got it. He got it. I didn't get it until he told it to me. And this was a guy who, you know, he was just a project manager for the Port Authority of New York. Had been dealing with bridges and tunnels all his life. But he got the spirit of this building. That's the best I can do for you. There's a young woman over here who had a question.
Hi. So you had mentioned that Hurricane Sandy had actually flooded your mechanical room.
Superstorm, Sandy. It was not a hurricane.
And that although it is deemed a once in a lifetime kind of event, how did that affect your construction process, your design process, and how did you, in essence, flood-proof your building and
It's not.
network? Oh, it's not. Oh, okay.
It's not yet. It's actually, there's another component of the staff that is isolated and working on all the flood proofing aspects of the design. What we did was the initial mitigation of the damages. You have to understand, like I said, our mechanical room, our electrical rooms were all flooded out. All that equipment was taken out, rebuilt at the manufacturers and brought back at big cost, because it's big stuff. But what also had to happen is every wire in that train station had to be pulled out. A lot of the conduit had to be taken down. The standard now is different. Now we're using a lot of saltwater capable resistant cables and the like. And by the way, you can't get any low voltage cable that meets that criteria, so you have to do other special things. But there's a program going on. One of the things that's interesting about Superstorm Sandy, I showed you the slide of water pouring in on the site. That was nothing. The water came from New Jersey. Hoboken flooded. When Hoboken flooded, it flooded the PATH station in Hoboken. The tunnel runs under the river and comes up at the World Trade Center. It became the drain. We were draining Hoboken. Okay? So one of the aspects of flood protection is how to seal the tunnels, the rail tunnels, which is not a simple task. But all that stuff is in process, and it will take several years to do. But the standards for doors, we've gone back and they've changed wall types and reinforced walls, reinforced doors, done a lot of other things to deal with that.
I hope you don't mind if I ask one other question.
No, go for it.
What is the best advice that you can give to students or people very early in their profession that you've learned through this experience?
Through this experience, oh, I'm going to speak in a much broader vein than that. Don't stop learning. And most important, don't stop learning is don't ever stop asking questions. I will tell you that one of the key lessons that I try to give to the staff, and you know, there's a popular saying now, see something, say something. And I always tell the staff, if you're walking around the office, you see something on somebody else's staff, somebody else's desk that you challenge, you say something. It's your obligation. You're part of this firm. But the thing is that you can't stop. I make mistakes every single day. I know I make mistakes. I have enough control of my ego, and my ego gets out of control at sometimes, but I have enough control of my ego to recognize I make mistakes. So what I've learned is to make the point of challenging myself to ask the questions that help me avoid as many mistakes as possible. That's the best advice I can give you. Okay. Last question?
All the way in the back.
Thanks. You alluded earlier to the cantilevered escalator. Was that the original design, and what kind of problems did you run across? Or were there other iterations of that?
Well, I will tell you, it was in the first drawing and it's in the last drawing. And it's built. What's beyond it has changed 200 times probably. We had, believe it or not, it's inside a building. We had the wind lab run a test on it to make sure that it wasn't over deflecting when the wind blew and affected the structure above, because everything is so interconnected that we want to make sure when the building is doing this, because these shells are not connected to one another. They're independent of one another. It's two shells. And they just kind of like tie at the ends, like I was showing you with the purse thing. We wanted to make sure that as they move, and as they're moving the adjacent parts of the slab, that they're not causing that escalator and stair combination to deflect. And we knew exactly how much it's moving. And what was interesting is the you know, it's such a sensitive structure to its own erection that we were doing studies that as we were sequencing the erection in our studies, if we put this component in, how does the overall structure move? So if we want it to be in this place in the final position, in its final configuration, where does it have to start to end up there? Because you have to understand, everything there is welded. We used erection bolts to, you know, put the pieces together, but then they welded for a long, long time. And, you know, it moves. The building moves. It actually moves 7 inches at the top. And the skylight actually has a control system that monitors that, and it tolerates the movement, because what happens is once it gets past a certain toleration point, the motors actually activate and they move the skylight to keep it sealed. So it's a pretty elaborate study. But you know, that's the least of it. The problem is, you think of all the normal things in a building that affect the structure and how the structure reacts. And one thing in this building is the World Trade Center is still considered the #1 target. And so the criteria that was established by the Port Authority after very thorough analyses was then upticked by the New York City Police Department. And I remember a meeting where Santiago, myself, my boss, our blast analysis engineer, one of our young architects, were in a meeting with Mayor Bloomberg and the chief of police. And we were having to present what we were going to do to deal with what we had the knowledge to know that they were going to ask us about increasing the criteria. And we had done some things in the design to deal with that. And so we were very proactive with them. But I'll never forget Mayor Bloomberg asking very pointed questions about the physics of blast and how it was going to affect this structure and how it was going to affect the glass. I give him a lot. The man is smart. I guess you don't get to be a billionaire without being smart, but unless you steal. But he was smart, and he asked really direct, pointed questions. So that movement is actually one of the least significant things that we had to deal with. We had much bigger fish to fry. That's it. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mike Garz, 1972 graduate of the School of Architecture and Planning.
Environmental design.
Correction, the School of Architecture and Environmental Design. Thank you, Mike. Ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock we have one more session that is an outreach to our local community and the relationship between the work we do here over the decades and look forward to in the future and the communities that host us. So you're welcome back tomorrow at 9. Meanwhile, thank you very much for your attention tonight and the involvement in our activities all day today. It has been a day of learning for all of us on the faculty and staff and student body at the school, and we are deeply humbled by the amount of attention and presence we've gotten this few days. Thank you very much for your time this evening.